Once again, we have our oral history microphone on the road, and we're visiting today just off Golf Course Road in Benton, Kentucky, at the home of Hettie Watkins Waggoner. Miss Waggoner, it's a real pleasure to be with you, and we thank you for letting us come.
It's good for you to be here.
Well, we want to get started right away and ask you about your background. Were you born in this county?
Yes, I was born at Olive, Kentucky, December the 6th, 1912.
All right, and your father and mother, do you know much?
My father was Charlie L. Watkins, and my mother was Gusty Collie Watkins.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 6 children. One died in infancy. My older sister was named Mela Watkins. She married Samuel Nanny. My older brother, Ed Watkins, he married Mary Connell from Florida. And then Charlene Watkins married Edgar Norwood of Olive, and they still live there. And then
I didn't realize that. Now, Edgar Norwood was a little kin to my father.
That's right, and he now lives on the home site that my great-grandfather, Thomas Goheen, homesteaded.
Well, you really go back to the pioneer days.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and I was related to the Goheens on both my father's side and my mother's side. My great-grandfather was, I haven't named the rest of my family though.
Well, go right ahead.
I'm next, and I married Herschel Waggoner, and then Everett Goheen. Most everyone called him E.G., and he married Nelva Gay.
Well, of course, that is Reed and Bessie's girl.
That's right. They had only one daughter,
Yeah.
and E.G. and Nelva had only one child, and they have 2 grandchildren then.
Mm-hmm.
But I traced the family tree back to my great-grandparents.
That's fine. You know, the genealogy people really love things like this.
That's right. Well, in fact, my great-great-grandfather was James Watkins, and from the material that I have accumulated, he came from Wales. And he had 2 sons. I think there was another one, but I don't remember the name of that one. James Goheen and Thomas Goheen. James Goheen married Elizabeth Utley, and Thomas Goheen married Phoebe Utley. The Utley were sisters, and they married brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And James Goheen and Elizabeth Utley, I might bring this in here, are buried at this called the Utley Cemetery between Hardin and Olive,
Mm-hmm.
up past where Ed Goheen used to live. And Thomas Goheen and his wife Phoebe are buried over on the Hamlet and Olive Road that's called the Goheen Cemetery. And his wife, Phoebe, was the first one to be buried there.
Mm-hmm. I see a Samuel Watkins
And
there.
Samuel T. Watkins, and his wife was named Sarah. She was Sarah Wade. And they are buried at a little family cemetery in Hardin between the Wades Creek and Wadesboro Road. And just recently, some of the descendants have put their money together and have a monument to place on the cemetery site.
Did you know that Samuel Rayburn Watkins was one of my dearest all-time friends?
That's right, and his father was one of the 8 sons of Samuel T. Watkins. Samuel McKinney Watkins was a brother to Silas Watkins, my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's another Samuel in the next generation, but Samuel T. Watkins had 8 sons, and some of them are buried there at that cemetery I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And then another great-grandparent was Elijah Colley, and married Polly. I don't have the name in the records of that one.
You don't have her maiden name?
No,
but of
no,
course,
I don't.
yeah.
And
That frequently happens.
he had a son named William Farrell Colley, and he married the daughter of Thomas Goheen Alfreda, but most everyone always called her Alf, like Alpha and Omega.
Yes.
And
The first and the last.
first and the last. And I remember Grandma Collie, well, I always call her, making a suit of clothes for my father, and my mother spun the wool thread, and I helped her pick up walnuts, black walnuts, and we used the hulls of that to dye the wool thread to make my father a suit of clothes, and Uncle Tom Collie, my mother's brother, and Grandma Collie wove the material and made the cloth for those 2 suits of clothes.
Isn't that
And I
interesting?
remember those clothes.
Now, were you born in sort of the Olive Hardin area? Or?
I was born between Olive and Clark's River. Down, if you remember, the old road that went from Olive to Benton.
Yes.
And I'd always go to Benton in the wagon days would go in the wagon or in the buggies, and we'd go that way, the bottom road. And there's always big singing time, and Tater Day would be a big, huge crowd of people coming back and going to the Benton.
So there was fun on the
Oh,
road,
yes,
wasn't
it was fun. And one of the main things that I remember was Sunday morning of big singing day, listening. We'd hear singing coming down the road, and someone would say, I wonder who that is. And they'd say, it's Boone Jeffrey and his family. And they'd just be singing as long as we could hear them.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting.
Now, where did you go to school, or did you go to school more than one grammar school in the
No,
county? or-
I went to only one grammar school, and that was at Olive.
Uh-huh.
And I've been trying to think of some of my earlier teachers. I believe Miss Zera Grubbs seems like was the name, and Miss Bonnie Ratliff. And
Now, I've
then,
heard the name Bonnie Ratliff.
he was
That is Van's
Van's
sister.
sister, that's right. And then when I got into the big room, we called it, that was the little room, 2-room school at Olive. And then Mr. Gus Harrison and Walter Bloomingberg. And one of the main...
Now, Walter Bloomingberg's kin to my wife.
That's right. He's your...
Wife's uncle.
That's right. Yes. And he certainly was strict, and people really did learn. And so we really didn't have to do a lot of studying. And I don't remember what superintendent visited the school, but that was always quite an occasion when the superintendent of the Marshall County came, and they'd let the big room, the little room come into the big room, and to get to hear him make a speech. And to this day, every time I hear the word pessimistic and optimistic, I think of a place where I learned it was the superintendent giving that example.
Yeah.
It was either Roy Chumler or Harry Peters, one of the early superintendents.
Well, you know, talking about Harry Peters now, he became quite a famous man, didn't he? Become state
He
superintendent.
became state superintendent, that's right.
Well, Marshall County's had some great teachers over the years. Now, you didn't quit your education at grammar school.
No, I started to Hardin High School, and there were not any cars then, and we'd go just different ways. And I went in a buggy with 3 different ones, and the river would get up, and we'd just have more fun, didn't think anything about it, the water running in the buggy bed, and in the afternoons it was just a jubilee when the whole gang would be coming out from Hardin or going to either Joppa or to Olive. Some were walking, and some were riding horseback, and some were in the buggies, and we had quite a time. And then after I graduated in 1930, 10 of us in class, 4 girls and 6 boys.
I believe my one-time debate coach, Alton Ross, wasn't
That's what I'm going to say. It was 1930 in Depression times, and I just knew that I couldn't go to college, but Mr. Junius Lewis encouraged me, and he said, I'll come and get you. And Alton, we stopped by Hardin, and we went to Murray, and we had an interview with Dr. Rainey T. Wells to get us jobs and I had a job washing dishes in the kitchen at the dormitory. And I worked the 2 semesters, and I didn't think but what I'd get to work back in the summer. But when fall came, they said, no, you gave up your job. Well, I had to go home and help my father with the farm and work, and so I just had to manage the best way I could from then on. So I just did, later on, I did get work back in at the dormitory. And I several years finishing school from 1930 to 1937, but in the meantime I got a, whatever it was, an elementary certificate, I guess, and I started teaching in this county. And so I taught 8 years in this county, and then I quit teaching and said I'd never teach anymore, and I was doing office work at various places, and then I went to Michigan in 1947, and the teachers were scarce, so they were needing teachers. I married in 1947, and we were living in Hazel.
Whom did you marry?
I married Herschel Waggoner. He was a barber, and he was a friend of a cousin of mine and her husband, and it was a joke of all the cousins that I was the last one to get married, and we just got to get Hettie married. So I guess you might say that I met Herschel on a blind date. And so anyway, we lived in Michigan after we married 13 years, and then we moved to Florida. And
well, you've lived all over the country.
well, in the meantime, I worked before I married, and I was teaching. I had been teaching at Gilbertsville. I taught. I'm just jumping from one thing to another, but I first taught at Olive at primary grades, and then I taught at Brewers at primary grades, and then when they started the Gilbertsville school, the TVA started. I was one of the teachers selected to teach there, and then I decided when the war came, they were needing wartime service appointees, or I got a job at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, as the statistical clerk. And one of the highlights of that, thinking back, was one day they said, all of you can be dismissed and go out on the flight line. And here all the people working there went out on the flight line, and we got to see Wilbur Wright climbing into this, I think it was a C-69 plane. And
Wilbur Wright, one of the original
that's
Wright
right.
brothers.
And they had a huge crowd, and showed the picture in the newspaper. And of course, I was a little head taller than the others, and I even found myself taller than others watching him go into that plane. And that was quite a fond memory.
Well, I should say so. Anyone who'd seen Wilbur or Orville Wright from the original Wright brothers who flew the first heavier-than-air machine at, what was it, North Carolina
Yes,
in
Kitty Hawk.
1903. Kitty Hawk. Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether it's whichever it was, but it's the one that lived was still living. So it was one of the brothers.
Well, that is quite an experience. I'm glad you put that in. I don't recall ever having interviewed anyone before who had ever seen either of the Wright brothers.
There's 3 of us girls from this territory that got jobs in civil service work. Louise Edwards, a teacher in this county, and Lulabelle Beal from Almo. So we 3 had a lot of housekeeping rooms, and
Louise Edwards, was that Buell's sister?
No,
A
she
different
was
one.
from Birmingham, and she's deceased now. So we had quite an interesting, about a little over 2 years, I guess. And then
Now, this is a little north of Dayton, Ohio, was it?
it was out from Dayton, and then it was Wright Field, and then Patterson Field. But now then I understand it's Wright Patterson, it's all one. But we had to ride, they called them the cattle cars. They didn't have the seats in them. We'd all just have to stand going out to to work back and forth each day. And it was quite an interesting experience. And then being as I wasn't on permanent civil service, I was just a wartime service appointee. So I could either take a lower cut or come home, but I'd been away from home, and my mother wasn't too well, and so I came back here and stayed a while. And my sister, Maylin Samuel, were living in St. Louis, and they wanted me to come there and work. So I was working in a office work and bookkeeping at a foundry, making different parts. And at lunchtime, we 3 office girls would go over to a small restaurant, but some days coming back from lunch, we almost lost our lunch because we passed by a horse factory
Oh.
had horses and butchered them, you know.
Yeah.
So that was interesting too. And
Producing dog food.
yes. So my sister and I would go to ball games, and on Ladies' Day we got to see the Cardinals play, and we went to zoo many times, and Busch Gardens was at some gardens in St. Louis. And then of course we got to see the famous horses as we'd be going down the street. Budweiser beer.
Oh yes.
And it was interesting to see them. Every time I see them on television, I think about it.
The big Clydesdale.
Right. So then after my mother died in 1946 and my sister passed away in 1947, that I didn't want to continue staying there alone. So my brother in Michigan, E.G. in Melville, wanted me to come up there. So I went there and got a job. My first work was working in general office work in an M&M auto parts store. And the office manager was quite a high-tempered guy. And so one day the Income Tax Revenue Service came out, and one of the men wanting to check the records prior to his being there, but he didn't have time to bother with them, so he was a little bit cross with them. And the man said something to him that didn't suit him, and so he whaled away and slapped him. And he had a ring on him, scratched the man's face. And so that's the first time I ever I didn't see the lick, but I could hear what was going on.
Did they get you in court to
That's the first time I ever had to be a witness in court, was go to court and explain what happened in the office. And this other girl and I were witnesses. So the man ended up by having to pay a lot more insurance. Internal Revenue got his personal records, and he said he had been paying half of his mother's upkeep, and he didn't have any of the receipts or anything, so he had to dig down in his pocket and pay more money. So that was quite an interesting experience. And in Michigan, that's when I met Herschel. And so we married in December, on my birthday, December the 6th, 1947. And we lived there 13 years. He was barbering, and I was doing office work, and then the teachers were scarce. And at that time, we were living in Hazel Park, a little town out on 8 Mile Road, not next to Detroit. So I didn't have any trouble getting a job there right across the school ground on their street. But I had to renew my lifetime certificate that I had from Murray. So I went to Wayne State University that summer, and I took, they said, take anything you wanted to. So of course, I was interested in gardening, and I took the gardening course, and some of the ones in the class said, well, you know more than the teacher, but it's just common sense that I'd had back in my days of working on the farm and in the garden at Olive.
Yes. Well, you've been to more colleges than you had grade schools.
Well, then after we decided it's just too cold. Winters were just too long there. And while we were moving, being as he was from West Tennessee, we decided to move south, and while we were at it, we'd just go all the way. And I had a brother, my older brother, Ed Watkins, was living in Florida. So we just decided we'd go to Florida. And Herschel took the Florida barber examination, and he passed it the first try. So someone had told him, well, maybe they needed a barber, and spoke highly of someplace, I can't say the name, on the East Coast. So we sent our furniture on ahead and had started to that place. And someone in Orlando at breakfast told us that she noticed in the paper they were needing a barber at Eau Florida. And so she said, it's right on your way to Fort Pierce. That's where it was. So we stopped at Eau and went over on the beach where the barber shop was, and Herschel started working that afternoon, and I sat there and listened to the ocean, and it was quite an experience. So we lived there 9 years, and I got to see all the missiles. In those 9 years, we were in the same county, Brevard County. And we'd have our little portable radios, and when they'd say that it's about ready, you could just see all the neighbors coming out in the street, and we could look in the distance 20 miles from where we lived. And the missile then would be about the height of a telephone pole. And it was quite an interesting experience. I wouldn't take anything for all that and all the friends that we met. And speaking of friends, we had a good friend at the church we attended, and here's a copy of his book, Homespun, by Gordon Carter. And Herschel...
He was a poet, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a poet, and he had written a special poem to Herschel, my husband, for giving blood at the Brevard County Hospital. He belonged to the Gallon Club, and if I may, I'd like to read it.
Well, go right ahead.
To Herschel Waggoner, you are more than a Methodist. I call you a Christian, my friend. Yes, for your share, your precious blood that will help an ill one to mend. I like to attend faithfully our church and to meet the other friends too, and to join in the songs and prayer that all good Methodists should do. But on all of life's rugged paths, the transcendent name now to wear is that of Christian, my friend, and you are this as blood you share. Congratulations to Herschel Waggoner. You are a Christian through and through. I like to think that God is watching all who perform such deeds so true. Sincerely, Gordon Carter.
That's a very touching poem, isn't it?
It certainly
I know
is.
you wouldn't take any amount of money for that, of course.
And then I might mention, well, we lived in Florida 9 years, and the winters were just wonderful, but the summers were just a little bit too much. So it was so far away from the relatives, we just decided to move back to Kentucky. Well, of course, naturally, he would like to move back to West Tennessee, but he said this must be God's country, the way I'd mentioned West Kentucky so much in Marshall County. And so another thing, my Aunt Katie Fawn, she'd always wanted to find someone that I could meet, going back when I first met Herschel, and different ones from Michigan would come back giving glowing reports about how wonderful a person he was, and she said, well, he must be an angel, the way I've all heard so much talk about him, but he was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved back to Benton then, and he got a job barbering, and he barbered for himself. And I had a heart attack and went to the hospital July the 14th, 1983. And in 5 days after that, he died suddenly.
Oh, well, that's too bad.
And
Did he like Benton?
oh yes, he took part in. He taught helped with me in Sunday school class for a full number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking, he enjoyed speaking. I don't know why he did, but he belonged to the Toastmasters Club in Florida, and he got several
Oh, that's a
medals
famous
for that.
organization.
Yes, it is. And he loved the people and the church people and the people of Benton and all the different customers he had. So he died 5 days after I was admitted to the hospital, and I stayed in. Of course, we all like to tell about our hospital days, but I was in the hospitals and rest homes, 3 different ones for 1 year and 14 months and a half. I was in 3 different hospitals and 3 different rest homes. I had open heart surgery at the Baptist Hospital, and the 2 arteries on my neck cleaned out. And so then I was in rest homes after that. And so last October of '84, I was able to move to this apartment, and I've been able so far to take care of myself since then.
You got a beautiful place here.
Yes, it's
And
very
although,
nice.
of course, everybody's had sadness in their life, and you've had plenty of it, but overall, it's been a pretty good life, too.
Oh, it certainly has, and I just rejoice in all the wonderful things that I've been blessed with.
I imagine that this home, where you're living now, has a lot more modern conveniences than where you grew up.
Oh my goodness, yes. I have washer and dryer here, and at home where I grew up, we had to draw water from the well 82 feet deep and wash out either in the cold or else bring the wash skittle in the house. And it is an open fireplace, and we did our washing inside during the winter days.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother made soap, and I remember making soap. And then when we were living in Florida, there's a recipe in the paper about homemade soap, and so I tried it, and we were having a church bazaar, and I took some out to church and won the prize for homemade soap.
Isn't that great?
So another outstanding thing in Florida, the radio station there said send in your wedding anniversary, your birth date, and different things, and they'll draw a card out, and the lucky one will get a free trip to the Freeport, Bahamas. So they happened to draw my name, so we got a weekend's free trip to Freeport, Bahamas.
You went to the Bahamas?
Yes, but the scary part of it was, on the way back is a small plane to Daytona Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And some drunk guy got on, and he was after the pilot all the time to take him to Cuba. So we didn't know whether we were going to get back to Florida or go to Cuba.
You thought you'd been hijacked.
Yes, but anyway, we made it back, and that was a fond memory too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, the time just goes so rapidly. I want to make sure that if you have any other special things you'd like to talk about, life's most embarrassing moment, or some funny story, or anything else, that we get it on, because we just have
Oh my goodness, have I been talking all
about
this
3 more
long?
minutes to go. So.
Well, I've always tried to be happy and humorous and think of the happy things, and I can't think offhand of any special humorous thing.
I remember what a wonderful time we had at your 50th anniversary of the high school class. Now, what was that?
1980.
1980.
That's right.
Mr. Ross came back from.
Yes, and he was the speaker for the evening, and he's certainly to be commended of the place he went in education.
Yes, he retired as superintendent of Oldham County, and I understand did a very fine job there, made a good name for himself and Marshall County.
That's right. And there's many outstanding people from Marshall County, if you just stop and think of the different ones that have gone on to higher places in educational work.
Now, you went to Murray State and Wayne State both.
And Wayne State, and then also in the meantime I went to George Peabody College when I was teaching down in Gilbertsville. I was teaching out at Brewer's, and then we had to take our books back into the superintendent's office. And when I took them in at the end of the term, Mr. Naaman Duke said, "Why don't you apply for the school at Gilbertsville?" That was when they were starting the dam, and they had the village of workers coming in from different places. Mm-hmm. And then they had the Gilbertsville school, but the county, they paid the county tuition mm-hmm. for the children to attend there. And did you know they had a colored school there too?
No, I didn't.
They certainly did. And as few families that lived there were black, and they had a teacher. Mm-hmm. And she was adjoining, I don't know just where the building was. But this was a little funny thing that I've remembered. At the end of the term, she told us that the children wanted to do something special to Dr. Sam Henson. You remember Dr. Sam Henson?
I do remember him, yes.
Well, he would visit that school too. And naturally, he was slightly bald. But one of the little girls didn't have anything else special to give Dr. Sam Henson. But anyway, she gave him a little box of hair straighteners.
Oh.
And this teacher was highly educated, and she was such a wonderful person. And all the teachers at Gilbertsville went down to some other TVA school to visit the school there. And so she went along with us, and she was a pleasant person and an enjoyable person to be with.
Well, thank you for sharing with us those marvelous moments in your life that have meant so much to you, and now they can mean a lot to everybody that listens in.
Well, I hope I haven't made too many blunders, and I certainly did enjoy doing it.
Oh, it's a real pleasure for me to be with you. This is Ray Mofield speaking. We've been visiting with Hettie Watkins Waggoner just off Golf Course Road here in Benton. And that concludes our oral history lesson for today.
this one too.